Welcome to Intermediate and Final Approach Management. For S3 students, you should now have a basic idea of all the rules and procedures about being in S3. Now, when you talk about how you're managing aircrafts, we're going to jump right into it. We're going to talk about the intermediate approach management, so the management from the beginning when they enter your airspace. We're going to talk about dead reckoning, exactly what that is, I'll come back to later. Final approach management, and we have to discuss speed control differences as well. So let's just start with intermediate approach management. This is the type of management you need to figure out once airplane's about to check in on your frequency, even a little bit before. The very first thing you always need to do is you have to make a plan. This is super important because you can't just see whoever comes into your airspace and then take it from there, because before you know it, there's going to be a lot of airplanes coming in. It could very easily look something like this. Here you have lots of aircraft coming from all sorts of different areas. So already here in the beginning, you need to be able to make a plan. Just getting a kind of an idea about what you can expect. Especially take a look at the vector lines on the different aircraft to see how far away are they and where could you expect them to be. You're looking at this scenario. Well, let's start making the plans. Getting in 2514. He looks like he's going to be the closest one. He's one of the first ones. So he's going to be already here in 5 minutes. Viking is going to be around here in 5 minutes. Fairline is going to be around here in 5 minutes. These are the three closest. Already here, you need to kind of look into a plan. Okay, how do we want to do this? Maybe we want to put Scandinavian 2514 as number 1. Put him in. And then we want to do maybe Viking as number 2. And then we want to get Fairline in as number 3. The other ones says all the way out here. The other one is all the way out here in 5 minutes. And these two are far out. You get jet time as well here. Maybe he comes in as number 4. Exactly how it's all going to be is going to be up to you, but you need to have some initial idea of what you can expect. Once they start to come into your airspace, you need to take use of the different types of separation. We're going to go through them again. You have already heard a little bit about them in the basic procedures and separation videos, but we're going to attack them again. The vectors, separation by vectors, separation by altitude, and separation by speed. And we're going to start with the vectors. So the vector should always be your first way of separation, because this is when you're far away, by far the most effective means of separation. This means when you have a few different ideas, or you have a few different tactics about how to do it. As you see here, now we're a little bit closer. Scandinavian 2514, he's already in our airspace. He's pretty clearly our number 1. Even though you have a clear number 1, you can still do separation by vectors by making sure that he gets the shortest path possible, which would be something like this. We still want to make some sort of square pattern, like in here, but we maybe give him a little bit of a modified base in order to get him in as fast as possible. Thereon, we know, okay, Viking, he's going to go in here. Fairline, if he's going to be number 3, well, we want to put him out here and then in so that he gets optimum separation behind the Viking. Let's zoom in a little bit. This is how it looks when it's zoom in. So a few different very important ways of separating. So what we're going to talk about is how to most effectively separate two aircraft. We're going to take a few situations. This is situation number 1. This is situation number 2. And finally, we're going to have situation number 3 here. What we're going to do with these situations, if we start at the first situation, we're going to look at Scandinavian 2514 and jet time 582. Two aircraft right behind each other is by far most easily separated by use of vectors. And that's being done very, very easily by giving one a vector that giving him the shortest possible path, and then the other one a diverging vector. Diverging vector meaning that he will go either a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, so that you have a diverging degree here, something like 15 degrees or more. In this way, you will find out that separation will increase as time goes on. This is what you want. If you don't feel like you have enough separation, you want to find a way to make separation increase over time. And this you most effectively do by giving vectors. Looking at the number 2 is when you have aircraft crossing. This is for Viking 3722 and Fairline 456. Now, you can already see that in 5 minutes, Fairline is going to be here and Viking is going to be here. But in case you want to give them a little more separation, you want to have 10 miles in between. And right now, this is, let's say, about 7 miles. So you want to make sure that you have a little bit of increased separation. Therefore, the best way, you have 2 ways you can do it. Either if you want them in a line, you can give Fairline a slight diverging vectors towards the other aircraft. Now this may seem counterintuitive, but it is a technique you should really consider using as you're turning the perpendicular aircraft, the one on the 90-degree angle, towards the aircraft. You will find that his 5-minute mark will go here. And then suddenly, in 5 minutes, you will have your 10 to 15 miles separation that you want. Another way, the way number 2 you can do is to more or less use the same idea as you did down here with the first one. But what you do instead is, as you have Viking coming in here on a vector, you allow Fairline to come in here and then turn him parallel. This is something you can do to the north because you have plenty of space. When you are to the south, you might need slightly different ways of handling. Then you might use the first method because you don't have so much space. The third situation is the one coming up here. And this is something that really tricks out a lot of people because what do you do now? Because you got Scandinavian 2514 coming here, you got Viking coming here, you got Fairline coming here, you got Jet Time, he's gonna come up here this way. You have a lot of aircraft coming towards the ILS. And now suddenly you have to get the SAS right in here in the middle. No, you don't need to get him in the middle. Remember, there's no pressure on you to bring in aircraft as fast as possible. Instead, what you do is you simply continue SAS 1407 on the arrival, which will take him like this. And once he's clear of Fairline and Viking, you turn him around and put him into sequence. This means that Scandinavian 1407 is actually the easiest one to deal with. Let's take a look a few minutes in the future. Then suddenly it looks like this. So Scandinavian 2514 Jet Time 582, they have been separated with 2514 getting the shortest vector possible, and Jet Time 582 a diverging vectors of 15 degrees or more. This will increase their separation. On the situation number 2, you've now turned Fairline and Viking more or less parallel, giving them just the separation that is needed. Scandinavian 1407, he's gone down on an upwind. And then once he's ready, once you have cleared all these aircrafts, again, you had your original plan, which was he was number 1, maybe he's number 2, he's number 3, he's number 4, and SAS 1407 is number 5. So now you wait until you can put SAS behind Fairline, and then you're turning him back and in on a downwind again. Now, of course, an important thing you have to keep in mind when you're doing separation like this is when we come to the second type of separation. And this is the kind of separation that's being used in conjunction with vectored separation, when you need aircraft to cross each other's path. And you have a perfect example on it right here. Scandinavian 1407 is going to cross the path to Fairline, is going to cross the path of Viking. Therefore, we need what is called altitude separation. This is the way to when vectored separation can't give it to you all the way around, because if you wanted to have no altitude separation, okay, then you have to get a vector here and then down and then up, and this is a way too big path to take in order to avoid going close to any aircraft. And then suddenly you have another 3 aircrafts coming out here. You have to make them fit in as well. That's why that we're using altitude separation in order to cut down on the vectors. So Scandinavian 1407 is a flight level 100, Fairline is flight level 80, and SAS 2514 is a flight level 80. So there is no problems. You just make them go all the way over and then back on. It is super, super easy. When it comes to how high aircraft are allowed to be, we will talk about that with altitude versus the airfields in a little bit when we come to the dead reckoning part. In the intermediate approach phase, you should not be worried too much about the height because aircraft are coming no higher than flight level 100, which is plenty of time to get descended. Now, for next thing we just want to talk about is then separation by altitude, separation by speed control. Now, just to take a recap, this was how it looked. So what the first step we did was that we made a plan. That was the before the enter your airspace part. We made the second part. Well, let's just stay with the first part. We made a plan. So he was number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and then we take it from there. But we have a good beginning, and then once the others come closer, we start incorporating them in a plan. That's the mode. Okay, then we have something to work out on. Then what happened from there was that they came into the approach airspace, and then we had to start vector them by separation. So SAS got the shortest path available. Viking got the shortest path available, but he's a bit further away. We knew where they were going to be in 5 minutes, so they got the path like this. Okay, then the jet time, he got a slightly longer diverging path, separation by vectors, so he could come in as number 3. Farrowline was in this instant put in as number 4, so that he is way far out and can easily be put in behind jet time. And Scandinavian 1407 will put on upwind to be turned back. This one was done by use of altitude separation so that he could cross path of the other aircraft. Now, coming into speed control, this is the last part of it as you're moving closer towards the airfield. Now take a look at this this one here. Now, don't mind Farrowline too much because apparently he disconnected at this point. But you have Scandinavian 1756 as number 1, Viking 3722, he went in as number 2, Jet Time 582 as number 3, and 1407 was now turned all the way back as number 4. And Scandinavian 2514 came in the meantime in as number 5. Good. So now, as you can see, you have achieved the separation you want. So there you got 10 miles, there you got about 10 miles, and there you got about 10 miles. You have a nice separation. Now what you need to do is to apply speed control. Speed control is not for achieving separation. Speed control is for maintaining separation. Now you want to make sure that these guys are not getting closer to each other. So there where you already have 1756 on a high speed, you keep him. You can, for example, give him 250 knots. The next one, you give him either 250 knots if you want to have the same distance, or you even put a little bit down, maybe to 220 knots because you know you want to get Viking in first. Then you do the third one, you give him maybe 220 as well. So in this way, you want to adjust the speed control just by a few different knots so you can maintain the separation once they get closer to the airfield. Does it all make sense? I certainly hope so. Now, that was the intermediate approach management. That was more or less until the threshold, the beam airfields part. Now, before we move on to the final approach management, we're just going to talk about dead reckoning for a bit. And dead reckoning is basically quick math calculations in your head. And this you really need to be able to do as approach, or as a minimum, you need to have more or less an idea. We're going to start with a very basic one, which is the positioning of altitudes according to the ILS. Lots of students are panicking, for example, when someone seems too high or someone seems too low, or expedite descent, use your speed brakes. What can you more or less expect from an aircraft? You can expect more or less 1,000 feet per 3 nautical miles, and 1 nautical miles he will travel for every 10 knots he needs to drop. And that's of course above 250 knots. So this means what? Well, this means depending on how far you want him out. Now we put a regular downwind in a 7-mile final. If we're putting him into a 10-mile final, you know you got to go a little bit out. You got to go at a base. You got to go have an intercept leg. All in all, what's that going to give you? That's going to give you about 10, 20, 20, 24, about 27 to 29 miles. It will look more or less something like this. So if you want to put him on a 10-mile final, if he is at flight level 80 at Beam the Airfield, he will be just on path. So how do we get to that? Well, 8,000, you go 3 nautical miles, so that means he needs 24 nautical miles to touchdown. And then plus he needs to maybe drop from 250 a little bit down, so he needs to drop maybe needs about 4 nautical miles extra to go from 250 down to his flap speed, which is normally about 210 to 220 for these aircraft. That means you need 28 miles. Well, you got 10 miles there, you got 10 miles there, you just get about 7 miles there and a 2-mile intercept. That will give you just around 27 to 29 miles. This is what you need. Without going into details, if you want to put him in a 6-mile final, this very short final in here, you need him just around 5,500, maybe even 6,000 is good. Also keep in mind, this is not maximum altitude. The aircraft can still get further down with more speed, with speed brakes, with flaps, putting down the landing gear. This is not max altitude. This is to make you feel comfortable. If he's flight of 80 at Beam the Airfield, he will make a 10-mile final, no problems. Keep these two numbers in mind when you're sitting and controlling, and try not to panic about high aircraft. The next thing of that reckoning is we want to look at how fast does an aircraft catch up, how many miles does a turn take, and how many miles does a turn add. So first we want to look at what's called a speed factor. This is about how many you want to produce, how many knots an aircraft are flying to how many nautical miles does he fly every minute. For that, you divide it more or less by 60. 120 knots divided by 2 nautical miles, divided by 60 gives you 2 nautical miles an hour. Same wise, 180 will give you 3 nautical miles a minute, and 240 will give you 4 nautical miles a minute. Don't sit there with a calculator and divide to 60. Just have an idea about especially these three numbers when you're sitting on approach, because this is more or less the speed range that they're in. Know by heart, if you have around 250, it will be about 4 nautical miles every minute. 180 knots, which is where they normally turn base or final, is going to be 3 nautical miles a minute, and once they're landing speed, they go 2 nautical miles a minute. What is important about these is not how many nautical miles a minute they go, but how much is the difference. So you can see if someone is flying 180 and the other is flying 240, he's only catching up with 1 nautical mile every minute. This is stuff you need to think about and need to know. You can read more about it in the training material. A few things once you move into final approach management. There's a few things, of course, that you should know. Aircraft should be plus minus 30 degrees of the final approach track, never more than 45 degrees. And the altitude must correspond to the distance where the crash will be intercepted. This should not be news to you. This should have been covered well in the basic procedure separation video. So when it comes to turns, we have to talk about the different turns. Aircraft are normally flying what's called rate 1 turns, or 25 degrees. That will give you more or less 2 minutes for a full turn. So 360 degrees will take 2 minutes, 180 degree turn will take 1 minute, and a 90 degree turn will take 30 seconds. How can this possibly be useful? This can be useful because it will help you understand how long time it takes for an aircraft to turn to base or final. This also means when you're looking at an aircraft going on base and you have your nice fine vector lines, you know these shows 1 minute. So this is in 2 minutes, and so on and so on. So this means he needs to have started his turn at the latest 30 seconds before he hits the ILS. Why is that? Because a 90 degree turn will regularly take 30 seconds. Remember as well, you need to give a turn to intercept the leg. So he needs to make the turn. He needs to have a short segment before he intercepts the ILS. So therefore, normally would recommend start giving the turn just in the area of 1 minute before he hits the ILS. About 1 minute, maybe just a little bit after, you start giving the instruction. Before he turned back, he's more or less at 45 seconds before. And then his turn, short level segment, and that's it. So he has to read back, he has to dial it in, he has to intercept the ILS about 60 seconds before. If you're on a sharp 90-degree base, it normally works fine. Talking about separation part of it, of course, you know you need 5 nautical miles or 1,000 feet. When aircraft are on the localizer, you of course need to keep in mind that basic separation is 5 nautical miles, just like on approach. You should avoid going less than 5 nautical miles. However, it is allowed. Once they go on the ILS, you have a minimum separation down to 3 nautical miles. Keep in mind, this is, you should, if I could spell, you should keep 5 miles separation. You must never go less than 3 nautical miles. If you're less than 3 nautical miles, the second aircraft must go around. This is with the exception of when they're with tower. When they're with tower, they can actually go down to 2 nautical miles. It's made out of the principle that the tower can see the aircraft and can adjust. So once you have transferred aircraft to tower, don't worry about the minimum separation that's now on tower. Just please keep in mind, it cannot be done by you. It's only by tower. As approach, you must adhere to at least 3 nautical miles. Remember the golden rules. The vectors is to achieve the desired separation. Speed control is to maintain the separation. This is very important when you come into final approach management. Remember, you want to keep it tight. You don't have a lot of space to deal with. Longer separation means a longer backlog. So once you need 5 nautical miles, keep 5 nautical miles. This is the way to do it, because otherwise you easily find your way out of your depth because you have so many aircraft and backlogs coming up. A good example is example like this: 5 nautical miles between 2 aircraft. One is on base, one is on final. Keep in mind that an aircraft needs 20 seconds to turn. You can see they're both doing the same speed, which is nice, makes it easy. That means approximately before this guy has been turned into the ILS, more or less 1 nautical miles will have gained, and the new separation once they turn will be about 6 nautical miles. Another good example is when can you turn an aircraft base when you have an aircraft on the ILS going in and an aircraft on downwind. Assuming about 5 nautical miles separation here, what you can basically do is, remembering it takes 20 seconds to turn. He needs about 20 seconds on base. And then he needs about 30 seconds as well to turn to final. That gives about 1 minute and 20 seconds in total. And of this speed as they both are keeping at this point, 3 nautical miles a minute, it will give you about 4 nautical miles plus a delay, which will give you more or less 5 nautical miles when they come in. So once they are 5 nautical miles on downwind and you turn the next one like this, then once they are on final, they will have just around 4 to 5 miles. Keep in mind as well, when you're turning an aircraft like this, well, to make a whole 180-degree turn, you need just around 60 seconds, meaning that you need about a whole 40 seconds when you're making a tight turn to go on base like this. So that's going to give you at 3 nautical miles a minute, just around 2 nautical miles extra separation. So when you have an aircraft going this way and another on this kind of a sharp turn where you turn him in behind, this is going to add you an extra 2 nautical miles and put the separation up to about 7 nautical miles. When you're coming in on the ILS, on the final approach management, you have to keep in mind that you got around 5 nautical miles of separation between the 2 aircraft. When it's very busy, make it 180 before the localizer for everyone, because it makes it a lot easier. This is again when we're talking about speed control. Important is not what speed they're flying. The important thing is what speed are they flying in relation to each other. So the less speed you have, the more calm and peace you have to figure stuff out. Normally, once stuff is super busy, 180, once they come into the final approach segment, is actually a very good speed, because it kind of gives you the time and the space to get everyone in a good manner. Once they're on the localizer, you normally say 160 miles until 4 DME. Think about these two things. More than 5 nautical miles, you can always keep the 180 speed restriction for a little bit longer, because then they can slowly catch up. If you have less than 5 nautical miles, maybe slow down the number 2 a little bit earlier down to 160. Play with the speeds like this so you just achieve the best separation. Don't do it half. You want to aim for 5 nautical miles separation. Try to get it. Remember just a few things. The 180 speed restriction should be cancelled 8 miles from the runway, and be extremely careful to use reduce to minimum approach speed. This is something that controllers like to do. Say, reduce to minimum approach speed. But it will create a huge backlog behind you, because suddenly you're realizing the aircraft you told it to is having a final approach speed of 120 knots, and then the aircraft behind, 5 miles behind, have 180. Now it starts going fast to catch up. So be very careful with this. Keep small speed restrictions. Only do this if you are really getting out of separation between two aircraft and you have no traffic behind. In the end, we're just going to look at how quickly people are actually catching up with each other. This is a typical picture. One is doing 150 knots. He's about to slow down to final approach speed, and the other one is 280. With 5 mile separation, look how little the difference is. The difference is 2.5 nautical miles a minute. The one on 5 miles final, well, he's flying 2.5 miles a minute, which means that he's been landing in 2 minutes. The number 6, he will in that 2 minutes, because the difference is a half nautical mile, he would be 1 nautical mile closer. So that means just here with a whole 30 knots of difference in speed, with one on 5 mile final and one with on a 9 mile final, he's only got to catch up 1 nautical mile by the time they both landed, and that is plenty of separation. 5 miles becomes 4 miles once the preceding landing. That's pretty easy. So once you are giving speed differences, don't panic about as long as speed differences are 30 knots or less. Or if the separation is 4 nautical miles or more, you should not panic right away. Remember, minimum separation is 3 nautical miles, and when you're in the tower control airspace, in Delta airspace, he can put it down to 2, but yours, of course, is 3. Thank you for paying attention.